All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive you ask for, all about selfless love in marriage. We got a podcast episode from one of you listeners, and wow, it really made me think about how we find that joy, the kind everyone's looking for in relationships.
Yeah, doesn't it? Makes you wonder, what if making your partner happy is actually the key to a happier marriage for both of you?
Right. It's like one of those paradoxes hiding in plain sight. And this episode, it jumps right in and challenges how we usually think about finding happiness.
It points out that we kind of all have that instinct to look for happiness from our partners.
Mm.
But then it throws this curveball. What if the real magic happens when we flip that around and focus on giving happiness to our partner?
Whoa. Okay, I'm hooked already. But how do we even start doing that?
Well, the episode brings up this idea of the spiritual self versus the natural self,
Mm.
our natural self. They're kind of wired to be, well, a little self-centered. It's all about what's in it for me.
Yeah, makes sense. We've all been there, right?
Oh, absolutely. But we've got this other side to us, too, this spiritual self. It's the part that wants something deeper, more meaningful. And it finds real joy in giving, in being part of something bigger than just ourselves.
So how does that work in a marriage? Are we saying we ignore our own needs completely?
Not at all. It's more about a shift in focus.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of always asking, what am I getting out of this?
Mm.
We start asking, how can I make my partner happy? And what's interesting, the podcast connects this to something from the Bible. It is more blessed to give than to receive from Acts.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's like we're made to be generous even if we forget sometimes.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. The episode takes this giving idea and connects it to something pretty profound.
Right. You got me on the edge of my seat. What is it?
It proposes that loving our spouse selflessly,
Hmm.
it could actually be a form of worship.
Really? Okay, I never thought of it like that before.
I know, it's a big idea, right?
Yeah.
And to explain it, the episode quotes Romans, talking about offering ourselves as a living sacrifice to God.
So like putting all our love and energy into our relationship becomes a kind of devotion, almost a sacred act.
Exactly. And I love that the episode doesn't just stay theoretical. It gives us some steps, some practical things we can do to cultivate that selfless heart.
Okay, give me the good stuff. I'm ready. What are these practical steps?
The first one is all about prayer. The episode says that praying for your partner's happiness, really genuinely praying for it, can change your own mindset in a surprising way.
It's like you're intentionally taking the focus off yourself and putting it on their well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads to the next point, intentional acts of love.
So not like big grand gestures.
Not necessarily. It's more about being consistent, doing small, everyday things, kindness, patience, respect.
Like weaving these little threads of love into the whole fabric of the relationship.
That's a great way to put it. And then the episode throws down a challenge. I find this one really interesting. It says we should actively look for joy in giving.
Ooh, I like that. It's not just doing stuff for your partner because you have to, but actually finding ways to make them smile and really enjoying their joy.
You got it. And the episode ties us back to the idea that our spiritual selves are renewed when we give.
So by focusing on our partner's happiness, we end up happier ourselves. It's that paradox we were talking about earlier.
You nailed it. And there's one more practical tip that's super important for this selfless heart thing.
Lay it on me, I'm ready.
Forgiveness. Holding on to grudges, that just keeps us stuck in this selfish cycle. It's all about our hurt feelings instead of understanding and making up with our partner.
So forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about freeing ourselves from that negativity and letting love come back in.
That's a great way to put it. And the episode even quotes Colossians, where it talks about putting on compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. It's like a recipe for a loving and forgiving heart.
Wow, those are powerful ingredients for a good marriage. And I'm noticing they're all connected, right? Forgiveness leads to patience, then kindness, and so on.
Exactly. It's like a beautiful upward spiral.
Yeah.
And to really drive these ideas home, the podcast highlights some verses from the Bible that get to the heart of selfless love.
Love those little nuggets of wisdom from Scripture. Adds so much depth to things. Which verses did they choose?
Well, the first one is from 1 Peter, and it emphasizes unity and compassion in a marriage.
Good reminder, right? Especially since nobody agrees on absolutely everything.
Exactly. It acknowledges we're going to have disagreements.
Yeah.
But instead of getting stuck in a power struggle, it says we should try to understand each other, support each other, even when we see things differently.
It's about putting the us first, even when it's tough.
Exactly. The second verse they highlight is Proverbs. This one's really powerful.
Ooh, I know this one. The tongue has the power of life and death. It really makes you think about the impact of our words, especially in the person we're closest to.
Powerful image, right? Thinking about marriage, it's like a call to use our words, to build each other up, to speak life and love into the relationship, even when things are rough.
It's about choosing words that build connection and understanding, even when we're feeling frustrated or hurt.
Exactly. And I think this is a great transition to the next part of our deep dive. We've unpacked some key ideas here. The shift from receiving to giving, the spiritual self, those practical tips. But what does it all really mean?
You're right, we've barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore here. Let's pick up where we left off in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're digging into this selfless love thing. But
Yeah.
I gotta be honest, part of me's thinking, is this really doable every single day? Like, always putting your partner first? Life's messy, right? We're only human.
It's a good question. And a lot of folks probably think that. The podcast episode, it actually addresses that directly. It's not saying we become like martyrs or forget our own needs. It's more about shifting your perspective in a subtle but powerful way.
So not denying our own happiness, but finding happiness in a new way. Yeah, exactly. What's cool is the episode suggests that real happiness in marriage, it often comes from the act of giving. Being that source of love and support for your partner, that's where the joy is.
Now that you mention it, that kind of circles back to the spiritual self idea, doesn't it? It's like tapping into that part of us that wants something more than just our own immediate desires, being part of something bigger. And in this case, that something is our marriage.
That's a great way to put it. And the episode goes on to say, when both partners come into the marriage with this mindset, it's like this ripple effect. It creates a deeper, longer lasting happiness for both people.
So it's not just making your partner happy on a surface level, but you're both actively invested in each other's well-being.
Exactly. And the podcast uses this really nice analogy. It compares a good marriage to a garden. Imagine two gardeners working together, side by side, both totally dedicated to taking care of the plants, helping them grow.
And the more they put into that garden, the more beautiful it gets, right? And they both get to enjoy it.
Exactly. Think of your marriage as that garden. When both partners are focused on giving love, supporting each other, encouraging each other, the relationship just blossoms. It becomes stronger.
Okay, I'm loving this analogy. So we're not just talking about being happy as individuals, but this shared joy that comes from taking care of the relationship itself.
You got it. And if we zoom out a little, look at the bigger picture, the podcast says this selfless love in marriage, it can teach us big lessons about personal growth, even spiritual growth.
Now that you say that, it makes sense. When we're putting in the effort to think about someone else's needs, to forgive, to be patient, to be compassionate, aren't those good qualities for all parts of life, not just marriage?
Absolutely. And the episode goes even further. It says that the challenges we face in marriage, if we deal with them with a selfless heart, they can actually help us become better people.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like marriage, if we do it right with the right attitude, it can actually train us to be the best versions of ourselves.
I like how you put that. But I got to admit, I'm still wondering, okay, that all sounds great, but how do we actually shift our minds?
Yeah.
From that natural selfishness to this selfless love? Especially when we're stressed, busy, maybe even arguing with our partner.
You're reading my mind. It's so easy to get stuck in our own heads, all our worries and stuff we got to do. How do we break out of that and really build a more selfless heart?
That's the big question, right? The podcast says the key is something called spiritual intelligence.
Spiritual intelligence. Never heard of that before.
It's a cool idea. Basically, it's getting better at understanding spiritual truths.
Okay, but what does that even mean? How do we use it in our marriage?
Well, in this case, it's about realizing that selfless love isn't just some nice idea. It's a powerful principle that can change a relationship.
Yeah.
And we build that spiritual intelligence through things like prayer, thinking deeply, and taking action.
So it's about intentionally lining up our hearts and minds with this selfless love idea. Not just hoping we'll become more selfless, but actually doing things to make it happen.
You got it. The episode says we should pray for our partner's happiness regularly. It also says it's important to think about our own motivations, how we're acting in the marriage, and then actually take steps to show that we're committed to loving selflessly.
So it's about making a choice to love in a way that goes beyond our ego, beyond what's easy or comfortable in the moment. It's about finding a deeper kind of love, a love that's rooted in something bigger than us.
I like how you said that, but let's be real for a minute. Every couple has problems, right? No marriage is perfect. How does the podcast deal with that?
Right. There are going to be times when we mess up, when our selfish side wins out.
Absolutely. The episode gets that challenges are just part of marriage. But it also says we can see these challenges in a new way as opportunities to grow.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more.
It compares those challenges to weightlifting, but for our spiritual muscles. Like lifting weights makes our physical muscles stronger, right? Well, facing challenges in our relationship and choosing to deal with them with a selfless attitude, it can make our spiritual muscles stronger too.
So we should see those tough times not as failures, but as chances to learn and grow, both as individuals and as a couple.
Exactly. The podcast says it's in those moments when there's conflict or frustration or disappointment, that's when we have the biggest chance to practice selfless love. Forgiveness, patience, compassion, understanding.
It's like instead of letting those challenges drive us apart, we use them to build a stronger foundation.
That's a great way to put it. And the episode gives a few practical tips for how to handle those challenges.
Okay, hit me with those tips. I'm all about practical advice.
Tip number 1, really listen with empathy. Try to see things from your partner's point of view, even if you don't agree.
I know, that can be so hard when you're in the middle of an argument. It's about resisting that urge to interrupt or get defensive and really trying to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. Tip number 2, don't blame or criticize. It says when we're hurt or angry, it's better to talk about our own feelings and needs without attacking our partner.
So like, I feel hurt when, instead of you always.
You got it. It's about taking responsibility for our own emotions and talking about them in a healthy way. And finally, tip number 3, be willing to compromise.
Ugh, compromise. Sometimes that word makes me cringe, like I'm giving up, losing.
I hear you. But the episode says compromise is actually an act of love. It's about finding solutions that work for both of you, even if it means letting go of what you want sometimes.
Okay, that makes sense. In a relationship, you can't always get your way, and that's okay.
Exactly. It's showing that you care about your partner's happiness just as much as your own. And that's a beautiful way to show selfless love.
Okay, I see how it all fits together now. Coming into marriage with this attitude of service, wanting to help your partner be happy.
And when you do that, both partners feel loved and appreciated.
But let's be honest, sometimes we all get stuck in our own little worlds, right? Our own worries, our to-do lists, our own needs. How do we get out of that selfishness and actually build a more selfless heart?
It's a constant battle, for sure. The podcast has this surprisingly simple but powerful antidote: gratitude.
Gratitude. I usually think of that as something that makes me feel better, not necessarily something that helps my marriage. How does gratitude connect to selfless love?
Well, the episode explains that when we focus on the good things our partner brings to our lives, it makes our hearts softer toward them.
It's like we stop focusing on what's missing or what our partner isn't doing, and we choose to appreciate all the ways they make our lives better.
Exactly. And it says we can grow that gratitude by really trying to notice and appreciate the small things our partner does.
Like just a small act of kindness, a thoughtful gesture, a word of encouragement, things we often take for granted.
Exactly. Those little things, they're actually what builds a strong and loving relationship. And the episode says that this simple practice can change things. It can make us more aware of our partner's needs and more motivated to show our love.
It's like we're training our brains to focus on the good stuff in our relationship.
You got it. And that positive focus just creates a better, more fulfilling relationship. It's like a positive feedback loop. Gratitude leads to more love, which leads to more gratitude, and so on.
I love that. So it's not about waiting for our partner to change or for things to magically get better. It's about us taking charge of our own mindset and choosing to see the good, to be thankful for what we already have.
That's a great takeaway.
Mhm.
And remember, we're human, right? We're going to mess up. We're not always going to live up to this selfless love ideal. So what do we do with those moments when we're not perfect?
I was just thinking about that. How does the podcast deal with that reality?
Forgiveness. Forgiving ourselves and forgiving our partner.
So it's knowing that nobody's perfect and giving each other a break when we make mistakes.
Exactly. The episode says forgiveness is absolutely key for a healthy and loving relationship. It helps us move on from those hurts and rebuild trust.
It's about choosing to let go of that resentment, that bitterness, because it can really poison a relationship.
That's a great way to say it. And the episode actually gives advice on how to forgive, even when it's really hard.
Okay, I want to hear this because honestly, forgiveness isn't always easy.
You're telling me. Step 1, according to the podcast, is to acknowledge the hurt. Let yourself feel the pain and process those emotions.
So don't try to ignore it or pretend everything's fine. Be real with yourself about how you're feeling.
Exactly. Step 2 is to choose to let go of that anger and resentment.
Recognizing that holding on to those negative feelings will only hurt us in the end.
Yeah. And the episode makes it clear that forgiving doesn't mean you're saying the behavior was okay or forgetting what happened. It just means you're choosing to let go of the bitterness so you can move on.
It's about understanding that everyone makes mistakes and that holding grudges keeps us from truly healing and getting back together.
Exactly. And finally, step 3 is to tell your partner that you forgive them.
So it's not just something you do in your head. You have to say it out loud so your partner knows you've really let it go.
Exactly. And the podcast says it should be sincere, from the heart, not just brushing things off or saying sorry without meaning it. It's about acknowledging the hurt, saying you forgive them, and choosing to move forward together.
That's a beautiful picture of making up. Even after conflict and hurt, there's still hope for healing and getting back to a good place.
And that brings us to something really important. The podcast kind of hints at this throughout, but I think it's worth saying directly. This ability to forgive, choosing to put your partner's happiness above your own hurt feelings, that's the core of selfless love.
That's so true. True love isn't about keeping score or wanting revenge. It's about grace and mercy, even when it's tough.
Well said. And I think this sums up what the podcast is trying to say. Selfless love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice.
It's a choice we make every day, in big moments and small ones. It's about making our partner's happiness a priority.
And when we do that, we create a marriage that's not just happy for both people, but also reflects something bigger than ourselves.
This deep dive has been amazing. It's given me a whole new way of thinking about what it means to have a truly selfless heart.
That's great to hear. But wait, we're not quite done yet. There's one more piece to this selfless love idea that I think you'll find really interesting.
Ooh, lead the way. I'm ready for it. All right, lay it on me. What's this next layer you're talking about? You said selfless love is even bigger than just having a happy marriage, right?
Well, remember how last time we were saying that working those selfless love muscles in our marriage,
Mm.
it can make us better people overall.
Yeah, like it spills over into other parts of our lives, all that love and generosity.
Exactly. And the podcast episode, it hints at something even bigger. It says that selfless love in a marriage, it could actually be a form of worship.
Wait, hold on. Worship. That seems like a big leap. I mean, yeah, selfless love is great and powerful, but worship?
It's a powerful idea, right? But think about it. When we usually think of worship, it often involves giving something of ourselves. We spend time praying. We use our talents to help others. We might even give money.
True. It's about showing our love and devotion to God through those actions.
Right. So what if we look at our marriage that way? What if all that love, support, the things we do for our spouse, what if that's like an offering to God?
I see what you're saying. It's like when we put our hearts into loving our spouse well, when we try to be patient and kind and forgiving, that shows our love for God too.
Exactly. It's like our marriage becomes a living example of God's love. Remember how the episode talked about marriage being a reflection of Christ's love for the church?
Oh, yeah. It even quoted Romans, that part about offering ourselves as a living sacrifice.
Right. So if we think about that comparison, it makes sense that the love we build in our marriage could be a way of worshiping.
It's like when we choose to love our partner selflessly, even when it's hard, we're part of something sacred, something bigger than us.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
And remember how the podcast talked about spiritual intelligence in marriage? It said we can become more tuned in to spiritual truths through prayer, reflection, and action.
Yeah. It's like we're learning more about what it means to love like Christ and then actually putting those ideas into practice in our closest relationship.
And what's a more powerful spiritual truth than selfless love? That's at the heart of who God is.
So it's like marriage becomes this amazing training ground. We're constantly learning and growing in how we love, forgive, serve, and show grace. Wow, this is really changing how I think about marriage. It's not just about me being happy. It's about something deeper, connecting to a bigger purpose.
I love that. And it all comes back to that first question we asked. If selfless love shows God's love, and if marriage can help us grow spiritually, then is loving our spouse selflessly, in its essence, a form of worship?
After all this, I think the answer is a big yes. It's about realizing how sacred our commitment is, seeing our love for our partner as a gift to God.
And when we do that, we don't just make our marriage happier, we also grow closer to God and show His love to others.
This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like I get what it means to really love my spouse well now.
I'm so happy to hear that. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making the choice every day to love in a way that honors God and reflects his heart.
You're so right. And to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive gave you some new things to think about and encouraged you to really explore the depths of love in your own relationships.
Remember, those little everyday acts of love and kindness, they make a huge difference.
That's a great reminder. Choosing to put our partner first, being forgiving, saying encouraging words. Those things might seem small, but over time, they build a marriage that's not just strong, but also a beautiful reflection of God's love.
So well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Yeah. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep choosing to love deeply and selflessly.
That's great advice for all of us. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.